everybody, and welcome to the Commander Pod, your Magic the Gathering podcast for all things Commander. My name is Kelton Howell.
And I'm Spencer Simpson. Today, we are finishing our series on lands with our definitive episode on building a mana base. Maybe we should put definitive in quotes. What we think will be a definitive episode on building a mana base. We've talked about dual lands.
It defines our process of building a mana base.
Yeah, exactly. Defines our process for building a mana base. And hopefully it's not too exhausting, everybody. We've been talking about lands a lot recently. We've talked about dual lands, tricolor lands, 5-color lands, and utility lands. And today we're wrapping it up to say, well, what does that all matter? How do we put that together when we're building a commander deck?
Yeah, so thank you for being patient with us as we've talked nonstop about lands. We were originally going to break up the episodes over a longer period of time so they weren't all back to back to back to back. But with the way planning worked out and the holidays, this is just how it happened. So if you're bored about lands, then after this, you don't have to listen to us talk about lands anymore.
Yeah, you'll have to play them still, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But we won't talk about them anymore.
Can I say, I was actually thinking about it today, and this is such like a nerdy, goofy thought, but I was just like, I love lands in Magic. They're like one of my favorite cards. I was like, why do I like playing land decks? Like lands matters, landfall, whatever. And it's just because I think having more lands than everybody else is so awesome. You can do so much more if you have more lands than everybody else.
Oh, it feels really good to untap on a turn where you're not supposed to have as much mana as you do and have just like a ton of mana. And conversely, it feels really bad to not have enough. So hopefully...
Yeah.
Or at least, or in the wrong colors or whatever. So that's kind of the point of today, is that we're going to be talking about at different numbers of colors is kind of our goal today, is to see like how you should be building your mana base so that you aren't ending up in a bad spot. Before we get into it though, what we want to talk about really quickly is that we have decided the winners for our December Deck Brewing Challenge. And we will be building a deck of each of the brews that we've chosen that have won. And we will be announcing those winners in conjunction with a gameplay video of us playing those decks in the coming weeks. We're not sure exactly what week we'll be doing that, but
aiming for the end of January. So look forward to that. And if you haven't already, come and join our Discord. We just finished December, but it has been a really great place to chat with you all, answer questions, and just see everyone hanging out and having a good time. It's awesome. It's been really fun. So thank you all for those who have joined. For those who haven't, the link is in our YouTube channel bio.
Yeah, absolutely. Please come join. It's been really, really fun. And we love seeing the number of people grow. And as the number of people grows, more people interacting, and it's been really fun. So back into a mana base. We talked about this in a lot of our episodes, and the format that we're going to be doing today is how your mana base changes and how building mana base changes as you increase the number of colors in your deck. Because, as we've talked about in some of our episodes, if you've watched them, if you haven't, go check them out. It does change quite a bit. You can't just like start throwing in, any number of duels or like a bunch of utility lands, because your deck will not play as smoothly as you would like it to, and you will not have the colors that you need throughout the course of a game if you're playing high color decks and you're just, including your favorite monocolor utility lands.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. So... and at the end, we'll probably talk about a deck or two that we've built recently that apply these concepts. So before we jump into one-color decks, we'll start with one-color decks. We want 36 lands, right? That's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to have all of these within the realm of 36 lands in a deck.
Yeah, when we put together our deck building template, we decided that 36 was probably a good starting point. Not the right number necessarily, but a good starting point for the number of lands you should have in your deck. Obviously, that scales with power level. That scales with your strategy. It changes with your mana curve. It might go down if you have a low curve, might go up if you have a high curve, etc.
Also, with the synergy of your deck. If you're a landfall deck, you want more. You want more lands because your whole deck is built on hitting land drops and getting more land drops than you should normally have.
Yeah, and your deck cares about that. And so if you run out of lands, your deck's not doing what it's designed to do, which it does anyways, but even more so if you're into the land strategy. So obviously that'll change, but I think as a good starting point, 36 is a good place to be. So we're going to be talking about the number of lands that you're running in reference to that starting point. And that, again, will change.
You can go watch our older episode about that. I'll try and link it in the notes to where we actually talk about that. And you can see the number. It was very mathematical. We looked at the stats in terms of how many lands you need to hit by what turn to be hitting your land drops. And 36 gave us the most flexibility in being able to hit your land drops, but also not flood out on lands. That's where we landed. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess this would also be a good time to talk about MDFCs. We had mentioned MDFCs a little bit when we were talking about this. MDFC is a modal double-faced card, is what it means. And so you can choose one face or the other face. There are lands that are MDFCs. The pathways are technically MDFCs because you can choose the one mode or the other mode. But when we're talking about MDFCs in the context of lands, we're typically talking about a card that is a spell on one side and a land on the other. The general wisdom with MDFCs replacing lands is that you want to do it at a 2-to-1 ratio. So 2 MDFCs for every land. I don't think we subscribe to that philosophy, right?
yeah, so I think if you have an MDFC, also I thought I heard you say MDMC earlier, and then that just evolved in my head to Run DMC, and I'm just gonna I'm just gonna refer to them as Run DMCs now. If early in the game you have an MDFC in your hand, you're just gonna play it as a land because you need to, and then late in the game, if you draw it and you still need a land, you're going to play it as a land because you need to. But if you don't, then you get to play it as a spell. That's the flexibility. That's the great thing about MDFCs, what makes them so powerful. So in my mind, if you're disciplined enough to be willing to play them as lands when you need lands, then it's 1-for-1 for the most part, because it's always going to be a land when you need it to be a land. Maybe like 1.5 lands for every one MDFC. I usually do, if I'm running a few MDFCs, if I'm running multiple, then I'll like just throw in a couple extra basics or something to kind of cover the cost of wanting to cast the MDFC sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So realistically, when I'm building a deck, I consider it a 1-to-1 swap. But the only reason I'm doing that is because, like you were saying, when you need a land, it's a land. And whoops, you don't have that spell anymore. But if it was a basic land, you never had that spell to begin with. And so
Sure.
the downside being is they do enter tapped, right? Some of them enter tapped. However, with the new MDFCs and some of the better ones from the past, like Agadeem's Awakening or like Shatterskull Smashing or whatever, those had the option to not enter tapped, and some of the newer ones also have the option to not enter tapped. It does cost 3 life, but it also can enter tapped. So if you need a land drop but you don't need the mana, then you're like totally fine just dropping it as a land, right?
I think so, except I mostly only play the MDFCs that I also want to cast the spell version of. So, for example, what's the Revitalizing Repass? Is that the Golgari one? So that's a protection spell. And so like my deck has in the tags, it has Revitalizing Repass under the land tag and also the interaction tab because I use it as a protection spell. And so there are going to be times in the game where I don't have another protection spell in my hand and I want that protection spell from my commander. I do not want to play it as a land. And so like in that sense, if I'm always playing them as lands and counting them as lands, then I'm giving up potential protection. So I guess if you only count it in one or the other, if you don't count it as protection and land, and you just count it as land, then it's 1-for-1. Or you could just count it as a protection, and then it gives you, hey, sometimes it's also a bonus land if you need it, and that's awesome. But that's why I think you probably do need to give yourself some more room on lands and not just have it be a 1-for-1 swap, is because some of these you want to cast it for the spell side, or like Sink into Stupor is so good, right? You want that interaction to be available to you. A lot of times the way I think about these, I mostly think about them as spells, and the times that I think about them as lands is in my opening hand. If I have a really good opening hand and it's only got like 2 lands and then an MDFC, then I'm like, okay, this is a keepable hand because I can play the MDFC as a land. Like it kind of lets me keep greedier hands if I draw a really good hand that's like low on lands.
Yeah, I like
Does
that
make
concept.
Sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I like the concept of not. You can double count it as a land, but you can't like double dip. It can't be a land and interaction in your deck, or else it doesn't really count as either when you need it. Yeah. I think that's a really good point, and I think is when you want to do like 1.5 or like 2-to-1, probably swapping. I think I was thinking of Sink and Stuber and Fel the Profane as the ones that I include in a lot of decks because I play a lot of Dimir and they're very good and they're removal. But I think what happens is I end up actually playing more removal in a deck because I'm playing them. And so in that instance, because I'm kind of over my quota on what I think is like my deck wants to run as removal.
So you're not really counting them towards your quota for removal.
Right, exactly.
Counting them only towards your quota for lands.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're just like bonus. It's like bonus removal.
Bonus removal.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's probably better than having them be bonus lands.
Yeah,
it's probably better
true.
to have them be bonus removal.
Yeah, that you're not like playing 13 removal, but 2 of them happen to be lands, and you're up to 38, but rather you're playing 36 lands, but 2 of them happen to be removal spells. I mean, at that point, they're like a Boseiju or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that's probably a healthy way to think about it too, actually.
So with one color decks, monocolor decks, mostly what you're worried about here is just having enough colored sources because you don't have to pick between lands. You can run all basics. They all produce the color of land, the color of mana that you need. And so how many colored sources do you want to run?
Yeah, I will admit, originally when I was writing the script for this, putting together our thoughts for this, I didn't include monocolor decks because I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. You just play like a billion swamps and you're fine. And then Killzone was like, don't we want to talk about monocolor decks? And we talked about this a little bit, did a little bit of calculation on hypergeometric calculators, and one of our first thoughts was like, well, can you just run if we counted the pips in some of our monocolor decks, it wasn't as many color pips as we thought.
It's usually less than half.
Usually less than half.
Somewhere between like 30 and 50% of your deck is colored pips.
Yeah, of the non-land cards in your deck, right?
Of the non-land cards in your deck, yeah.
Right. And so the idea was, okay, well, can we just run half colored pips and half utility lands? Because we want to be as greedy as possible here and see if we can get some value out of our lands. And the answer is no. And that's because at that number, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the percentage of seeing the number of lands you want, which was probably like 3 pips over the course of like 6 turns, we said, was
like 20%.
20% or something, which is really
like
bad.
That. Yeah.
But the problem is as you go up, it actually jumps up really high. So like at like 25 lands or whatever, 27 lands, and don't quote us on this because these were very cursory calculations, was like 70 to 80%, which is pretty good. The problem is over 6 turns, there's a chance that you see those on turn 6, right?
Yeah, you don't get your last colored pip until
turn 6, right? And exactly. And in the example of my deck, which was a mono black Shirei deck that plays a lot of small creatures, and so I'll need a lot of pips to be able to double spell. And the example of Kelton's, that is a Shield of the Apocalypse deck that has 2 pips on the commander. Kelton's deck needs 2 pips early, and mine needs 2 pips early. At least, at very, very least.
Yeah, because I also usually want to cast Shieldred with a Feign Death effect in hand, which is another black mana. So on turn 5, if I'm going to cast Shieldred just without ramping, I need to be able to have 3 out of my 5 lands have black pips. And so in order to feel really comfortable with having multiple colored pips on an early turn, you probably want to be running 30 out of 30 of your 36 lands with colored pips.
That is the fewest I would probably feel comfortable with. I think any lower than that, and I start to get worried that I'm going to draw a land, and it's going to be a land that only taps for colorless.
Yeah, so 30 colored pips, 6 colorless sources. And there are plenty of really great utility lands that do add a colored pip.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's free.
That's what I was going to say. That gives you lots of leeway, actually. That's a ton of utility lands that don't tap for a color, and more than I would want to play. I think I'm playing 6 utility lands, and most of them tap for a color in my deck currently, which means I could be playing more. Like, I'm not playing Talon Gates of Madara, which does filter into a color, and probably you want to protect Shirei, because a phase out is way better than a... than anything else in a Shirei deck specifically, because you need the same instance of Shirei. We're not going to get into that, but I think it's. I think I should be. I think, long story short here, and we're probably going to see this throughout the course of the episode, is that I should be playing more utility lands. And and I think the number, it was surprising to me the number you can get away with playing, even in a monocolor deck, because so many of them do produce colored mana.
Yeah. Yep. So try to stick to only 6 colorless sources in your monocolored decks, and you will likely not run into color problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
shouldn't be a problem.
And 6 colorless sources among your lands. Like a lot of this is part of the discussion as well. Was a lot of ramp that we play in monocolored decks. If you're not doing land ramp, does have to be colorless ramp because the colored ramp in non-green colors is pretty limited to colorless.
Colorless.
Yeah, and so you're even more hungry for lands to produce colored pips if you're trying to ramp. Anyway, on to 2 colors. Outside of monocolored decks, this is probably the easiest.
Yeah, because you're just gonna jam as many untapped 2-color lands as you can. And so when we build our decks, I think the process that we usually go through is we'll add basics to our deck to block out our mana base as we're working on the rest of our deck so that we can get down to 100 cards and not have to worry about our mana base. So in the example of a 2-color deck, we'll put in 18 of each basic into our deck list just to block out. We need 36 lands for our mana base.
Yeah, absolutely. And then once you put your deck together with the rest of your, what's the math after 36 lands, 64 cards, including your commander, Moxfield's really awesome here because they have a tool at the very bottom of your deck list that will show you your distribution of mana pips in your deck. So
yeah, it'll say, for example, blue constitutes 23% of your deck, 19% of all symbols, and then it'll tell you your blue mana production. But your mana is producing 42% of your mana base is producing blue mana. So
right.
That's pretty good coverage.
Yeah, it's pretty good coverage. But if you're playing 20% blue, then you're probably playing closer to 80% black, right? Outside of like colorless spells that you might be casting. And so the 18 and 18 split that we start out with is not going to cover it. And this is when we start to include duels and cut the lands that we don't need. And so I think the way we typically do it is that we will add in a bunch of the duels that we want to be playing. And we'll talk about the ones that we typically do. We talked about them in our tier list. We'll just briefly mention the ones that we typically are playing here. We'll add in all of the duels that we want to be playing, and that will change, obviously, our distribution, and we'll start cutting basics to get down to the distribution we want. So, like, I have
to get down to 100 cards with the distribution that we
want. Exactly. So, I have a Wilhelt zombie deck that's a Dimir deck, but only 21% of the deck is blue pips. And so, when I was adding to this deck, it was adding all these dual lands and then just cutting island, right? And then eventually cutting a swamp because I don't want to have too few, but cutting to the point. And I don't think, this is probably a good time to mention this as well, I don't think it's good to say 20% of my deck is blue. I want 20% of my lands to be blue producing lands.
No, I was actually thinking about that. I pulled up on Moxfield I have 5-color sliver deck, and I was like, I wonder how I set my mana production versus the percent of symbols pips in my deck. And the white, blue, and red pips are all about 22% of the deck. Black is only 16, but green is 37. So I obviously have more green, and that's because green fixes my colors in the deck, which is why I'm playing more green spells.
Right.
But then if I look at my mana production, it's white, blue, black, and red are all 42%, and green is 45%. So like half of my 42% of my lands, at least in every color, will produce any color I need, like the color I need.
Sure.
Which is cool. So just because I'm playing fewer black doesn't mean that like I necessarily need to cut down on my black mana production. Like, and in fact, that ensures I'm going to hit my black mana. So I don't know like what the balance is of percent of pips versus percent of production.
Yeah.
I don't know how you balance that. And I think it's easier in 2 colors because you can pretty visually see like the weight and the balance of those.
Yeah, but that's like the power of dual lands too, right? Like if I just pulled up my Wilhelt deck. If I were just playing only basics in this deck, right? I have 21% of my deck is blue, 73% is black, and so that there's a lot of colorless cards in there that are filling up the rest of the space, right? But that if I was playing just basics, I would probably, and I wanted to match it up, right? It would be 21% and probably like 20%, 80% probably is what it would turn out to. I'm playing a lot of duels in this deck, and so what I ended up at was that I have 69% of my deck can produce black mana, and 47% of my deck can produce blue
Yeah,
mana.
that's awesome.
So that's over 100%, right? But that's because the dual lands are doing a lot of heavy lifting there, and I'm just weighting towards the black a little bit so that I am always guaranteed to have a couple black pips, but still able to cast blue spells, right? Because that's like, you don't want to be not able to cast half of your deck. And so, again, that's the power of playing these dual lands. And so that's when we start including our fetch lands, right? We start including like a fetch land, our shock lands, bond lands. Alpha duels we have on this list. If you play alpha duels, I have a note here. We don't play them. But we probably should be, right?
Yeah, I told Spencer right before we recording that, I finally pulled the trigger. I finally have my full set of 10 alpha duels here from Dominaria United. So thank you, Pleasant Kenobi, for the idea there. The fetchable tapped lands from Dominaria United play a whole lot like an alpha duel when you Sharpie out it enters the
battlefield tapped. Yeah. Did you write in the correct names on them too? You've got an Underground Sea.
Yeah, here's my Bayou.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, Underground Sea is actually the hardest one though, because it doesn't leave you with very much room.
Oh, because it's contaminated aquifer or whatever, and you have to.
So long.
Yeah, for sure. That's funny. Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason we don't play them is because we typically play cards we own. That's less true for me now because I've just been wanting to proxy fun decks and not had the budget to buy them. And I still don't play alpha duels. And not to go on too much of a tangent, but we were talking about this a little bit today, and it's got to be because when you drop an Underground Sea, people are like, "Oh, really? Like Underground Sea?" Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I feel like
regardless of if you're proxying it or not, there's something about the art on an Underground Sea where people see it and they're like, "That's an alpha duel."
Yeah.
But if I drop my Underground Sea, which looks like this, I don't think people are gonna care that much, right? There is something about the art on a alpha duel, I think.
Yeah, potentially. I think I get part of the stigma because I was listening to Magic content creators, earlier in my Magic career, and I heard a lot of like, don't play alpha duels, or like weird stigma around alpha duels. Specifically, not to throw any shade, but specifically I was listening to like a Commander Quarters like episode, and they were talking about lands. And he was talking about alpha duels, and he's like, someone was like, I play them because I have copies of them, but I always I feel like I look sideways at people that are playing them, that just slot them into their decks. And I get that he's like a budget channel, but even so, like, I think if we're advocating for people to play a good just play a good mana base is kind of what we advocate for, just like proxy and play a good mana base.
And proxying.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Then why are we like, but we don't play alpha duels, like turning our nose up to that? I don't know. In any case, I think you should. And so that takes up another dual land that's very good in your deck.
Yeah, so fetch lands, you were saying fetch lands, alpha duels, shock lands, bond lands, and then you start to get into like command tower. Why every deck can play command tower. And I don't play it in monocolor because it doesn't make sense. A basic is strictly better. But anything 2-color up, command tower is awesome. So is Exotic Orchard. We talked about this one for a while as well. I think it probably fits in most 2-color plus. I think it's just going to be very serviceable there. You're very occasionally you're going to whiff. And we were talking
about Exotic Orchard in 2 colors, and like maybe you don't play in 2 colors because you might whiff. And then we went over the last Commander Night with you we had, and at every table
there were no games.
There were no games. At every table there was a 5-color deck, first of all, and then at least another 3-color deck that was overlapping one of your colors. So
yeah. And then stuff like Fabled Passage and Evolving Wilds, obviously less good fetch lands, but still very serviceable. Pain lands, Surveil lands, Filter lands, Slow lands, Check lands, Pathways.
Yep.
Then they start to get a little less good.
Yeah, this is usually where I stop. In fact, I'm not even playing the Pathway in one of my decks, and I probably should be. But I don't think I play the Filter lands either. I should be. I need to upgrade my mana base in some of these instances. But like the Pathways is like where I end up just like moving on to basics, because in a 2-color deck especially, basics just rock. They're good. Like if you're just trying to hit land drops and you've already hit one of these other ones.
It works for 50% of your colors.
Yeah, exactly. It's doing great. You'll probably start playing utility lands as well, so you can start cutting basics for things like in a typal deck, Path of Ancestry is very good, 3-Tree City, Cavern of Souls, stuff like that. Power level depending, I guess, on Cavern of Souls and some of those, I guess, or whatever you want to be doing. And then you can start cutting for utility lands as well. Like, I don't think you have any business. Again, power level dependent, whatever you want to do. I will cut an island for an Otawara every day of the week.
Sure.
Because it's an island that also is
interaction.
Interaction, right?
Yeah, it's pretty good. And here we didn't talk about utility lands, but as you go up in colors from monocolor, you want to be playing less colorless utility lands.
Yes.
They're just not going to be as good. You're just having a higher chance of getting stranded without a color. So I really think in 2 colors plus, I'm really only playing a couple of them. I'm probably playing like 2, 3. If I'm feeling real spicy, maybe 4.
Yeah, probably just the best.
Deck.
Probably just the best ones. Though I think MDFCs you probably can get away with more of. Like you mentioned, revitalizing your past earlier, which is
but those aren't colorless.
Right. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess I was also thinking of like even like the color producing. You're probably running fewer single color producing MDFCs or utility lands potentially as you move up in colors
I am
as well, right? Mm-hmm. Just because as bad as it is to get stranded on colorless, right? It's probably only slightly better to be stranded on only one color in a 4 or 5 color deck, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, moving on to 3 color decks. We start out with the same process that we do in 2 color decks. We just say 12 of each basic land type that our deck supports, right?
Block
Getting up
out
to
our
36.
mana base with 36 lands.
Yep. Add all the colors, and then Moxfield is equally helpful here, and we'll start adding in colors. The thing that's really crazy about 3 color decks, and I don't know why this always blows my mind, but all of a sudden you can run 3 times as many of each dual cycle. So,
yeah. Whereas in a blue-white deck, you can only play the blue-white fetch.
Yeah, 1.
Or, okay, fetch is actually such a bad example. The blue-white shock.
Sure, right.
In Esper, you can now play the blue-white, the white-black, and the black-blue shocks. That's 3 shocks now instead of 1 shock. So we've just tripled the number of the best lands that we can put in our mana base.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned fetches, and this is probably a good time to mention this. You can technically play fetches that have only one of the colors in your deck. So if you're playing Esper, you can play Arid Mesa, right? Which searches for a plains or a mountain, even though you're not playing mountains, because it will get you a plains, and it doesn't have a color identity. However, in lower or mid power decks, and honestly in like decently high power decks sometimes as well, I am not playing off-color fetches. I don't think our play group is playing off-color fetches as much until we're reaching like really high power.
Yeah, I think the reason you want to play off-color fetches, generally, beyond just thinning your deck, which there's some statistical debate onto whether or not that actually helps your deck.
Sure. And fixing very well, right? Because even like an off-color fetch will get you 2 colors.
Sure, it can get you 2 colors because it can fetch planes that will, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think generally the reason you want to run off-color fetches is because it would synergize with your deck in some way.
Sure.
It would get additional fetches into the graveyard. It would let you sacrifice a land more often. And those things generally are just going to... That's a free way to increase the synergy of your deck, which is going to increase the power level of your deck oftentimes.
Yeah, I mean, I have a mid-power Tasigur deck that I was really trying to make mid-power and really trying to nerf, and I included off-color fetches because it synergizes with the deck really well. And what I found was that because in a 3-color deck, here's something crazy, you can run 9 of the 10 fetch lands because only one of them doesn't have overlap with your colors, right?
Technically could run the 10th too. You're just going to fail to find when
you're just going to fail to find with the 10th fetch land. Yeah, exactly. It's not a land drop for you.
Yeah.
But you can run 9 of the 10 fetch lands. And so in a Tasigur deck that's 3 colors, I can run 9 of the 10 fetch lands. And Tasigur has Delve. So what that was meaning is that on turn 1, I was almost guaranteed to hit a fetch land. Not really, but like on the first couple turns, it felt that way. And then you fetch for a Surveil, you bin the Surveil land, and then your next turn you play a fetch land, and that's like a turn 2 Tasigur, basically, right? Because you have 3 cards, I guess 2 mana and 3 cards, so you're not quite there, but you're getting really close. And if you cast any sort of cantrip or anything like that, you are getting Tasigur out and then neoforming for something really huge. And so even though it synergized really well, at a mid power, I didn't feel like that was very good. So as a rule of thumb, we are not playing off-color fetches as much in lower power decks. But even the 3 fetches that we are playing and the shock and the bond lands, that equals 25% of your mana base at 36 lands, right? That's 9 lands, which is crazy because before it was like 1/12 of the deck, right? And so now we're up to 1/4, which is pretty wild.
Yeah, that is crazy. And after that, then you're looking at things like Command Tower, Fabled Passage, Exotic Orchard, Triomes. Let's talk about Triomes. I guess we'll talk about Triomes as we get to more colors because you can play more Triomes.
Yeah.
And then you can also play things like City of Brass, Mana Confluence.
Stuff like that. I don't really play those in 3 colors as much.
I don't
I think
really
the
either.
Pain lands are just probably better because they can produce colors when you need them to. They don't produce any color, but they also don't always ping you, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
I don't know. The
How
Surveil
often
lands
do
are
you
quite
think
good.
you take a damage from a Pain land? Like 50% of the time?
Probably 50% of the time, I would guess.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, and Mana Confluence 100% of the time, which is like honestly like
Gets you
not the
one more
worst thing in the
color.
world. Yeah, but in a mid-power game, that's going to turn into, if that's a turn 1 Mana Confluence, that's 8-10 mana
damage.
over the 8-10
Which is like
damage.
a fifth of your life total.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So but I think what you'll notice is because we can run 3 times as many of any given dual land cycle, we don't have to dig as deep into our dual lands. This is something we mentioned in our previous episodes, so that we can only play the
really
better versions of them.
Yeah, it's really fetch, shock, bond, and then like the best multicolor lands like Command Tower, Fabled Passage, Exotic Orchard, and then it's probably like Surveil, Pain, check, slow if you need additional ones. And
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
probably most of the best ones.
And with those 4 additional cycles and alpha duels, which we didn't mention here, with all of those cycles, that's 24 lands, and that's a lion's share of your mana base. And so at that point, you can include basics pretty confidently as well to
definitely to fill out the rest of
to
it.
just fill out your land drops because you're going to have the colors you need.
I was just going to remind people, maybe you skipped the episodes, maybe you're coming here, you didn't watch the rest of the episodes. We have tier lists for the dual lands, the 3 color lands, whatever. So you could just go to the dual land tier list, look at the best ones, and you get 3 of each of those if it's a full cycle of lands.
Yeah.
So
within any
use
given
that as a
tier,
reference.
we don't have them ranked within any given tier. So
No.
use some
But
judgment there.
Fetch, shock, bond first.
Yep. Those are all
and
the top.
and alpha duel if you're playing
And alpha
duels.
duels if you're playing alpha duels, which again, maybe you should be
Why
because
not?
if you're proxying, why not? It's fun. We also understand if you're not, we're probably going to start doing it or see if our play group is chill with us starting to do it because it'll just help games play better. Utility lands, channel lands, MDFCs. This is the point at which you probably want to play fewer non-color producing lands.
A lot fewer.
Yeah, and probably, I think you're probably still fine to play like single color producing lands. Like again, a Boseiju and Otawara, those are replacing a forest and an island. But the 2 color MDFCs I think come in really clutch here. Like again, we've mentioned Revitalizing Repast a couple times. That
Cards
cycle
is
is
good.
that cycle is so good. It's a tapped 2 color land if you need a land, and is also just a spell. And I think those
And like
are
a decent spell.
a good spell. Yeah.
Let's just read this one for those who like aren't super familiar with this card.
Sure.
Revitalizing Repast is a hybrid Golgari mana, so it can be black or green. It is an instant. You put a 1/1 counter on target creature, and it gains indestructible until end of turn.
Oh yeah. This is probably one of the best cards in my Tana Tevesh deck.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
backbreaking in that deck.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome. Makes Tana bigger, keeps Tana alive. I think it's
And
pretty
it's
solid.
a land.
And it's a land if I need it to be a land. Heck yes.
Yeah. Oof.
So, and the one thing we want to mention here before we move on to 4 color decks is that at 3 colors, it is really important that you do not skimp on playing basic lands if
Because
you are
you could.
playing. Because you could. You certainly could. You certainly could. You could go pretty deep into the dual lands. Do not skip on playing basic lands, especially if you are playing basic land ramp. If you are in green and you are playing
Kodama's Reach.
Kodama's Reach, Cultivate, whatever. Like, make sure you're not skimping on those. If you are playing Wayfarer's Bauble in other colors or Planar Atlas, Like,
Oh, I love Planar Atlas.
so good, but you don't hit a basic and it whiffs, right? And maybe you shouldn't be playing Planar Atlas in 3 colors anyways.
No. there's got to be something in those 3 colors that's better than Planar
That's
Atlas.
better than Planar Atlas, for sure. All I'm saying is don't skip on basic lands. There's also a world where someone like Path to Exile is your creature and you get to search for a basic, or Assassin's Trophy, I think, is basic land, right?
Also, Planar Atlas isn't basic. It's just land.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, play Planar Atlas. But Assassin's Trophy, Path to Exile, very popular removal spells. They make you search for a basic, or they let you search for a basic land. Don't lose out on that benefit because you are too greedy to play basics.
Yep.
Especially in 3 colors. Goodness gracious, you have a lot of slots to be able to play basics.
Totally. In 4 color decks, your access to duels doubles.
From
Doubles
3 color.
From 2 color.
It doubles from 3 color. It is 6
'Cause it goes
times
up to
what you can play in
18.
2 color.
Oh, it's 6 times what you can play in 2 color? Wow.
Your access to duels, right? Because you can play in a 4 color deck, you can play all but 4.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. It doubles again.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah. So, if you just play the Shock Fetch Bond, once again, we'll omit alphas for now. Shock Fetch Bond is 18 lands. That is half of your mana base.
Yep. It's pretty solid. Pretty solid. And then from that point, you're playing, Command Tower, Exotic Retrieval Passes. We're going to sound like a broken record, but like as you move down this list, you're just playing the better version of things.
Yeah. Play
don't always have to be.
more of the good cycles and less of the bad cycles.
Yes. And I know people will be listening to this and saying, here's like people talking about optimizing their decks or like trying to on the optimization train, building like the better, more consistent decks or whatever. But honestly, I think one thing we've subscribed to over the past little while is that playing a better mana base doesn't make your deck more powerful necessarily. It just leads to fewer non-games. And part of the challenge of Magic is building a deck that doesn't have non-games. And if you want to put those constraints on yourself that building a mana base is included in that, then like fine, by all means. But if you are just trying to build a deck that does the thing and you don't want to have to worry as much about your mana base and entering tap and whatever, you could follow this advice and just don't play fetches, shocks, and bonds. Play like scry lands. Like this applies to any power level of lands. We're just saying the ones that we're playing.
We are very proxy friendly in our group, but part of the rule 0 of our group is even if you don't proxy, you should proxy your mana base. Just proxy the fetch, shock, and bond into your mana base so that we can all play games and you don't have non-games because your mana sucks.
Yeah.
Right?
At the beginning, early on when you and I started proxying and we didn't have people proxying, it started being a bad thing because you and I were playing, fetches, shocks, bonds, and people weren't. And that was not good. And so I think you printed a fetch, a shock, and a bond in every color for everyone in our play group to just say,
handed them a stack of proxies. Just said, here, put these in your decks. I don't want you to have non-games anymore. It's just not fun.
Yeah, exactly. Because it wasn't that our decks were like overperforming. It's that our decks were not having non-games, right?
Yeah.
And other decks were. Or having significantly slower games, which turn into non-games when you're the only one not hitting
Every
your
land
colors.
you play is a tapped land.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk about
Off of my
here.
soapbox. Sorry about that.
No, that's good. So in a 4-color deck, how many triomes can you can play? 4 triomes? I don't remember how to calculate the number of triomes that you can play in a 4-color deck. Someone's gonna say in the comments, whatever it is, there's a certain number of triomes that you can play in a 4-color deck.
Do you want to play all of them?
Do you want to play all of them? That is the question. Oh boy, I think this could be one of the things where you look at your distribution of pips to see which colors are the heaviest, and you probably play the triomes in those colors. So you probably just don't play.
You can play half of the triomes in a 4-color deck.
Okay, you can play
because
5
half of them will have a color pip that is not in your deck.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry about that.
Okay. So 5. Are you jamming 5 triomes in your 4-color decks?
I don't think so. I think I'm probably jamming the triomes that have 2 of my most played colors potentially.
Yeah, so that's three of them.
I think 3 of them. Yeah. So if I'm playing mostly Dimir, then that is 1, 2,
3.
3.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that sounds about right to me. Triomes, I don't like that they enter tapped. What makes them so powerful is that they are fetchable. So if you're playing the the 6 fetches that you can be playing
Yeah.
in a 4-color deck, now all of a sudden all of those fetches get all of your colors.
Yeah.
If you're mostly all of your colors if you're playing your 3 triomes that hit your top 2 colors.
Yeah. You know what? On second thought, actually, I'm wondering if I only play 2 and I play 1 that is my 2 most played colors and then
Okay.
my 3rd most. And then I play 1 that is my 2 most played and then my 4th most. Because your chances of drawing into a triome are fewer. And if you ever fetch for a triome, you get 3 of your 4, like right away.
Okay, what if you play 2 of them, but one of them is your top 3, and one of them is your top 1 and your bottom 2?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I like that a
So
lot.
you can fetch for all of them, but you're always getting your most used color.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that's really good. I think
Maybe
it's what
something
I mean,
like that.
We're gonna talk about one of my decks later, where it's a 5-color deck where I play a single triome, and it is just the 3 colors I play most.
Yeah. I think that just makes your fetches way better, right?
For sure.
But also you don't want to draw triumph. I mean, the great thing about triumphs is that if you do draw them late, you can cycle them
Right. For 3 mana.
for 3 mana, which is like a lot of mana.
Yep.
But it does make triumphs just make your fetches so much better. But
Yeah.
is 2 enough? Is 2 enough to make your mana base good?
Oh yeah, I think so. Like to get 3 of your colors in 75% of your colors in a single land is really good.
I think we're both in alignment that we don't play all 5.
No, I don't think so. I don't think you play all 5. I think the opportunity cost of playing a land that enters untapped is probably better. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so 4 colors, be super selective with utility lands. You don't need to be running colorless land mana sources. I think the one that I pretty consistently play in most in most decks is Command Beacon.
That's interesting because I don't play Command Beacon, but in our
know.
Utility Lands episode, I thought that I probably should be playing Command Beacon more than I am.
Yeah.
It's just good. It's just good for
It's
whatever.
just really good.
You lose a land later in the game to be able to cast your commander discounted by 4 or 6 potentially. Like that's really good.
But you still probably want to be including some basic lands. We talked about this before the episode. Do you run 1 of each basic? Do you run like 2 of your top 2 colors? How do you split up your basics? I don't know that we came to a conclusion on that.
No, I think, because your argument was I just run a couple of the color I need most in the deck, and my argument was, well, just run 1 of each, because then your lands are all pretty and you only have 1. It just says 1 all the way down on Mox Field.
I like that your argument is aesthetic. I do appreciate that.
No, but I
can
also think,
respect that.
again, there's a world where you, need to fetch for 1 or whatever. Or,
Often
again, if you're...
Evolving Wilds
Yeah,
or
if you're-
a Fabled Passage.
Yeah, sure. Or even if you're playing 4 colors and you're still playing Cultivate in 4 colors, you don't want them to all be forests also, right?
Sure.
So
Regardless, you should have a couple of basic lands.
still play basics. Yep, 100%.
And probably in 5 color too, right? Okay, so let's talk about 5 color decks. So you could literally fill your entire deck with fetches, shocks, bonds, 1 of each basic, and command tower. Is that right?
Yeah, that is 36 lands. Yep, because you can
Okay.
play 10 fetches, 10 shocks, 10 bonds, 5, 1.
5 basics and a command tower.
Do we think you should do that?
No.
I don't think
No,
so.
I don't think you should do that.
Yeah, I don't think so.
You could if your mana distribution was perfectly even across every color. Sure.
Yeah,
That's
100%.
that's probably good.
100% do that if it's perfectly even. Chances are it's not, but even if it's not perfectly even, you're pretty high chances you're going to see a fetch, right? And you can fix based off of your fetches, and you can go see the colors that you get the colors that you need in the distributions you need them. This is the point at which I'd like to talk about a deck I built recently, which is my Garth One Eye deck, and just now, I'm realizing that that's maybe not a good idea because Garth produces Black Lotus, which means that I can produce color pips at a more consistent rate than other decks if I just get all 5 colors.
Okay, did you build your mana base around that though? Did you build your mana base thinking that you always have a Black Lotus in hand?
No, I included cards thinking I would always have a Black Lotus in hand. So so part of the theme of the deck is I'm playing a lot of cards with 3 color pips of a specific color, right?
Which influences your distribution of pips.
Which influences your distribution of pips. The way I built my mana base was that I'm playing a fair amount of Mana Dorks and Utopia Sprawls and stuff like that are green and produce any color early on in the game. And so I index pretty heavily towards green. And I also play a lot of untappers, which are generally blue. Yeah. So I'm playing a lot of green and blue. Yeah.
Simic is like the most present color pair in your deck.
In my deck, yep. So I indexed pretty heavily towards blue and green lands. That being said, it may not look entirely like that. What that looked like mostly was indexing away from. It feels like a Bant deck, really. It feels white, blue, green, and so it was indexing away from Rakdos. For the most part, yep. But indexing towards Simic and Bant. So this may not be a great example of like how to build a 5-color mana base because Garth does have like some pretty niche things that you want to be doing. So
but that's fair. Like, how often are you building a mana base that's just perfectly split across 5 colors? You're not. I mean, that's why you have to learn these principles. You have to know, okay, I don't just play all fetches, shock spawns, one of each basic in the command tower for my 5-color mana base.
Right.
Like, that's just rarely does it ever work out that way. I will say I do my 5-color sliver deck. I just looked at the mana base. I play 10 fetches, shocks, I think all 10 triomes, and then I play some of the 5-color stuff like Command Tower, Cavern of Souls, and then just some of the other typal stuff like Path of Ancestry,
sure,
and Unclaimed Territory and stuff like that, which are just 5-color lands. For slivers. So I think mine is kind of perfectly split between all of them, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, but your mana probably isn't. Like your pips in the deck probably aren't, right?
This is the one that I gave the example where black and green. Black is a little bit less than the rest of them, and green's a little bit more than the other. But other than that, yeah, I mean,
it's pretty evenly split.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that would make sense to me in a sliver deck where you're playing the good slivers across all of the different colors.
Yeah, that's kind of how they're built.
And 5-color decks are also interesting because of a majority of 5-color decks, not a majority, but a lot of 5-color decks have commanders that are 5-color pips, and so you do want to get 5 colors, right? Like
you do, because you don't get your Black Lotus until you've cast Garth, and
right.
for Garth, you do need Rakdos colors. You don't just need Bant colors.
Exactly. So there's a world where maybe I should be just playing all the fetches.
I don't think so, because as you said before, like the green stuff in your deck does fix your colors for all 5 colors.
Right.
And that's also why I index a little more heavily on green in my sliver deck, is because Gemhide Sliver so my slivers can tap for any color.
Yeah.
And I'm playing Nature's Lore and Birds of Paradise and Delighted Halfling because that's, once again, fixing my mana.
Yeah. I mean, so part of the reason I didn't include all the fetches in this deck was because I was trying to build it at a mid-power, and I was worried that including all of the fetches would make it way too consistent and good. As I've been playing it, it has played quite well. Though last time I won, it felt like a fluke on this deck because it was like... and as I've been goldfishing it, I'm also starting to realize that maybe I do want these fetches to fix my colors a little better. But I do think I've built a good mana base for my color requirements, even if you do miss occasionally. And
yeah, I mean, in 5-color, you should miss occasionally. That's part of what balances the power level of a 5-color deck. If you're playing 5-color deck, you can play all the best things in all 5 colors. The challenge is getting all of those colors online when you need them. And in the right quantities, right? And so you could make an argument that saying, okay, optimizing your mana base to fix for colors proxying all the duels and fetches and whatever's that will raise the power level of your deck because you're able to more consistently hit your 5-color stuff. On 5 colors, you're still just going to miss sometimes. You're still just going to be missing a color.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I think it's probably correct to not be playing the fetches, like all of the fetches here. And the reason I think that especially is because specifically in Garth, because I'm doing an untap strategy, I'm playing a lot of bounce lands as well. Because as I untap, you get additional value for untapping bounce lands because they tap for 2 mana. So now they all of a sudden tap for 4, whereas untapping a non-bounce land is significantly less than that. So the way this distribution, if I can jump into the distribution here, has turned out is I play Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, because those are the 2 kind of just best 5-color lands. I play the Bant Triome, because that is the 3 colors that I need most in the deck. I play the Bant Fetches, so Flooded Strand, Windswept Heath, and Misty Rainforest. I play all of the shocks except for the Rakdos ones. So that turns those fetches that makes the fetches very efficient because I can go get the colors that I need, though I don't have very many fetches in the deck. There's a world where I could swap some of those shocks for fetches. I think the jury's out on that. And I play the non-Mardu Bond, Surveil, and Bounce lands. So would be
7 of each of them.
7 of each of them. Yep, exactly.
So 21.
So that puts me at 36 lands total, 9 of them being shocks, 7 of each of them being,
Do you have
Bond, Surveil,
MDFCs
Bounce.
in it?
I don't believe I have any MDFCs in the deck.
Wow. Which is probably okay for a 5-color deck because MDFCs do get worse as you get more colors.
Yeah, absolutely. Most things need to be tapping for multiple colors, or else I'm not going to be able to do stuff in the deck.
Yeah. That's a great example of how to build a mana base for 5 colors. I mean, that's a lot of colors to try and manage. But like you said, it's not just putting in equal amounts of every color. It's building around what your deck wants to be doing.
Yeah.
The other one that I've done recently, I think the last mana base that I built was for my Titania deck. I haven't really redone a mana base since then. It's 40 forests. It's 40 basic forests. And I know, you're going to say, why don't you put shifting woodland in it? Why don't you put whatever? Because Titania cares about forests. And
sure.
That's all I want to do is play forests. And I put 40 of them in it because I wanted more than 36 because I want to play forests and I want to play multiple a turn. And there's a sub goal of the deck to get all 40 forests on the battlefield at a time, which I've done.
Yeah, what's your hit rate? What's your hit rate on getting all 40 forests on the battlefield?
Whoa, it's 10%, but I have done it. And there's actually a new card from Duskmourn that enables that combo. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say because it might be 10%, but in the last month or so, it's felt like 50% ish. Because it's been crazy. Yeah. Although some of them have been 3-player games.
Sure.
Which would affect that for sure.
Yeah, so really your mana base is up to your colors, it's up to your strategy, it's up to you. If you just really want to slam that Maze of Ith, put it in there, and this I think is probably one of the episodes that we should do in the near future is it depends a lot on your local meta.
Yeah.
Do people play non-basic land destruction? In our play group, people do not play non-basic land destruction. They should probably. I think objectively, it's the right thing to do, but we don't play it, so we don't worry about it. We all play a lot of non-basic lands. If people are playing a ton of theft in your pods, run. What was the one that we gave a really hard time of? Homeward Path. We gave that card such a hard time in our utility land episode because a
lot of people jumped to the defensive Homeward Path, which surprised me. But we don't play.
You know what?
We don't play theft.
We do play. I play theft.
But not a lot. Not
a lot of it. If it's super prevalent in your local meta, play it. Obviously, then it's good.
Yeah,
you should build to some degree. You should build for your local meta because those are the games that you're playing. If you're trying to build agnostic of your local meta, I mean, sure, it's maybe more pure, and you could sit down at another play group and it could perform better, I guess. But that's not who you're playing with. You're playing with your local playgroup. I don't know.
Okay, I have a question for you. Should I, in my low-color decks, start playing Blood Moon, Winter Moon,
yes.
Magus of the Moon, stuff like that?
Absolutely.
I think it'd be honestly, I'm really debating it, and there's a part of me that's like that would be so sick and awesome, and there's also part of me that's like I think my playgroup would hate that.
Yeah, we would hate you. So I do think, yes, I think the benefit of playing a mono red deck is that you should be playing Blood Moon.
Right.
Probably not at lower powers because it turns it into a non-game for a lot of people, and people aren't going to have the right kind of interaction to be able to interact with it consistently.
Right.
So like, yeah, if you're building like a high mid or a high power mono red deck, absolutely you should be playing that card because guess what? You're playing mono red, and that is the benefit of playing mono red.
Yep, absolutely.
Do I think our playgroup should be playing more Graveyard Hate because you play almost exclusively Graveyard Matters decks?
Yeah.
Yes, we should. We should be playing more Graveyard Hate.
And honestly, can I say just a really quick plug for Garth and like not Graveyard Matters, but just being able to get stuff out of the graveyard? Like Graveyard Hate is not exclusively good against graveyard decks.
Garth has regrowth stapled to him.
Yeah, exactly. I think I undervalue like just even like a regrowth or a Bala Ged recovery to just or Eternal Witness or whatever.
Insane.
Yeah, they're nuts. Yeah. They're so good. Play Bala Ged recovery. It's a land.
That's an MDFC. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for listening. We hope that we provided something to help you in building your mana bases. We kind of went through our process, our examples, and referenced those tier lists and the utility list as well that we put together. Go check those out. You can find those on our YouTube. You can find them on our Moxfield as well. We need to get those probably listed as public. I think they're just unlisted right now. But you know where to find us. Please like and subscribe to get notified of our weekly Commander content. You can always find us on thecommanderpod.com. And until next time, remember to always pay the one.